Hey there, welcome. Today, we're diving into a story that's both chilling and mysterious, one that isn't just a horrific true crime, but a tale that still haunts people to this very day. Picture this: a quiet, peaceful town in Iowa, Villisca, where one night, everything changes forever. On the night of June 10, 1912, the Moore family and two young girls, the Stillinger sisters, were brutally murdered in their own home with an axe. But what makes this case so eerie is not just the brutality of the crime, but what happened after the murders. The house where this tragedy unfolded has since become known for strange happenings, ghost sightings, and paranormal activity. Could the spirits of the victims still be lingering, trapped in the place of their untimely deaths? Or are we simply dealing with a crime so horrific that it's impossible to leave it behind? Throughout this journey, we'll walk through every step of the investigation, from the chilling details of the crime scene to the supernatural tales that have emerged around the house. What starts as a story of murder will unfold into something far beyond just a crime, blending the world of the living and the dead in ways that still leave people baffled today. So, are you ready to uncover the truth, or maybe just the eerie unknown? Join me as we step into the world of Villisca, where dark history and the supernatural collide, and an unsolved mystery continues to echo through time. Let's begin. On the night of June 10th, 1912, in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, a brutal and horrifying crime took place that would shock the local community and capture national attention. The Moore family, consisting of Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 of the children's friends, became the victims of a gruesome murder that would go down in history as the Villisca Axe Murders. What started as a seemingly peaceful evening in a quiet rural town soon turned into a nightmare of unspeakable violence, and the details of the crime left a mark that still lingers today. Villisca, a town with a population of just over 2,000 people at the time, was the kind of place where nothing much ever seemed to happen. Life was simple, predictable, and calm, with little to disturb the tranquil rhythm of daily life. However, on that fateful night, the Moore home, a modest 2-story house at 508 E 2nd St., became the site of a massacre that would forever change the town's reputation and the lives of its residents. The Moore family, well known and well liked in the community, was found slaughtered in their own home. The brutality of the murders, the mysterious circumstances surrounding the crime, and the haunting presence that would later be associated with the house made it one of the most infamous cases in American criminal history. The night of June 9th, 1912, had started like any other for the Moore family. Josiah Moore, a respected businessman and local farmer, had invited 2 of his children's friends, Lena and Ina Stillinger, to spend the night at their house. After attending church together, the family returned to their home, unaware that the horrors awaiting them would leave an indelible scar on the town and on American history. By morning, the Moore family and their 2 young guests were brutally murdered with an axe. The crime scene was unlike any other the local authorities had encountered, leaving them baffled and desperate for answers. As the investigators arrived on the scene, they found the house eerily quiet, the doors locked, and no signs of forced entry. What they did find was a scene of unimaginable carnage. The bodies of the 8 victims were found in their beds, each having been struck multiple times in their heads with an axe. The fact that the killer had taken the time to cover the victims with sheets after committing such a horrific act was deeply unsettling. There were no obvious motives or clear leads, and despite several theories emerging over the years, the case remains unsolved. This enigmatic murder would come to symbolize not only the gruesome nature of the crime, but also the growing fascination with the supernatural events that seem to follow in its wake. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, the town of Villisca was in a state of shock and fear. The once peaceful community now grappled with the terrifying reality that a violent killer had slipped into their midst, leaving a trail of terror that would haunt them for years to come. With no immediate suspects and the crime scene offering few clues, the investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders quickly became one of the most puzzling and perplexing cases in American criminal history. But the true horror of the case would not lie solely in the brutality of the murders themselves, but in the eerie presence that would soon be associated with the house where the killings occurred. The house at 508 Era 2nd Saint would become a local legend, not just because of the lives lost there, but because it seemed to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who died within its walls. In the years following the murders, reports of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and unsettling sensations began to surface. Villisca's quiet streets were now home to a mystery that blurred the lines between true crime and the supernatural. The story of the Villisca Axe Murders had only just begun to unfold, and the eerie tales surrounding the house would ensure that it would never be forgotten. The brutality of the Villisca Axe Murders is what makes the case so horrifying. As the investigators examined the crime scene, the gruesome details began to emerge, painting a chilling picture of what had taken place on that fateful night. The killer had used an axe, a weapon that, by its nature, left behind a trail of violence and blood. But what was particularly unsettling was the manner in which the murders were carried out. It was not a quick act of violence, but a calculated, slow, and methodical attack. The victims were all found in their beds, as if they had been caught unaware, in the very space that should have been their sanctuary. Josiah and Sarah Moore, along with their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, were found in their respective rooms, with their bodies covered in blankets. The Stillinger sisters, Lena and Ina, were also discovered in one of the beds upstairs. Each victim had been struck multiple times in the head with the axe, and the brutality of the blows left little to the imagination. The killer appeared to have used the axe to methodically and violently bludgeon each person, focusing on the head and upper body. Some reports suggested that Josiah Moore, the father of the family, had been the first target, as his body was found further away from the others, leading investigators to believe he may have been attacked while he was still awake. The rest of the family had been struck while they slept, making the attack even more horrifying. The Stillinger girls, though not part of the Moore family, had been invited to spend the night, and they too were victims of this senseless violence. What made the crime even more unsettling was the lack of apparent struggle. It seemed as though the family members had not fought back. Their positions in bed indicated that they had been asleep when the blows were delivered, and there was no sign of a struggle in the rooms. The sheets and blankets had been pulled up over the bodies, as if the killer had taken time to carefully cover them, adding an eerie touch of calmness to the chaotic violence of the crime. The killer had left no obvious signs of forced entry, and the windows and doors had all been locked from the inside, leading investigators to suspect that the perpetrator might have been someone familiar to the family. In addition to the brutal murders, there were several oddities at the crime scene that raised more questions than answers. Despite the violence of the attack, there were no signs of robbery. The Moore family's valuables, including watches and jewellery, remained untouched, suggesting that the killer was not motivated by theft. The absence of any obvious motive only deepened the mystery, as it seemed that the murders were carried out purely for the sake of violence. The killer also seemed to have taken great care to avoid detection. After the murders, he covered the mirrors in the house with bedsheets and turned the lights out, creating an atmosphere of eerie stillness. The doors were locked from the inside, but there were no traces of the killer's exit, leading to speculation that he had stayed in the house for some time after the murders were committed. Some believed the killer might have hidden in the attic, watching the bodies and waiting until the authorities left before making his escape. The fact that the killer left no clear evidence behind, and the lack of a coherent motive, made it clear that this was no ordinary crime. As the investigation began, law enforcement officers were faced with an almost insurmountable challenge. The town of Villisca was small, and everyone knew each other. The murder of a family in such a brutal way left the entire town shaken. The fear of a killer still being at large caused widespread panic, and rumors began to spread. Some residents suggested that the killer could be someone they knew, a local figure who had slipped under the radar. Others speculated that the crime had been committed by an outsider, someone who had come into the town with the sole purpose of carrying out the murders. The lack of solid evidence and the baffling nature of the crime made the case even more difficult to crack. The local authorities were at a loss, and the case soon began to draw the attention of national news outlets. As the days and weeks passed, the townspeople were left with more questions than answers, and the mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders continued to grow. The investigation would become a long and frustrating search for justice, but no one could have anticipated the eerie turn the case would take as the story of the murders took on a life of its own, one that would involve not just crime, but also the supernatural. In the aftermath of the horrific murders, the investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders quickly became the focus of both local law enforcement and national media. The sheer brutality of the crime, combined with the lack of clues, turned the case into a daunting puzzle that even the most experienced investigators struggled to solve. As news spread, the town of Villisca was inundated with law enforcement officers, journalists, and curious onlookers. The peaceful town, once untouched by tragedy, now found itself in the center of a chilling mystery that no one could easily unravel. Initially, the police followed traditional investigative paths, questioning neighbors, friends, and any potential witnesses who might have seen something suspicious on the night of the murders. The first assumption was that the killer was an outsider, someone who had slipped into town with the intent of committing the crime. But despite a massive manhunt, no suspects emerged. There were no reports of strangers in the area on the night of the murders, and no one had seen anyone entering or leaving the Moore home. The lack of forced entry further fueled the suspicion that the killer might have been someone familiar to the family, someone who knew the layout of the house and the daily routines of the Moore family. Several theories emerged, each more bizarre and unconvincing than the last. One theory suggested that the killer might have been a transient or vagrant passing through the area. Another theory pointed to a disgruntled acquaintance, possibly someone with a personal grudge against Josiah Moore or his family. However, no concrete evidence supported any of these theories. There was no sign that Josiah had any enemies, and no clear motive emerged for why anyone would want to kill his family in such a brutal manner. One of the more widely discussed suspects was Reverend George Kelly, a travelling preacher who had been in Villisca at the time of the murders. Kelly was known for his eccentric behaviour, and some members of the community found him to be somewhat unhinged. Kelly had a history of mental instability, and some speculated that he might have snapped and committed the murders. He had been seen in the area the night of the murders, and some claimed that he had been acting strangely in the days leading up to the crime. Kelly was questioned by the authorities, and his behavior raised suspicion. However, despite intense scrutiny and several rounds of questioning, no evidence linking Kelly to the murders was found, and he was eventually released. Another theory that gained traction was that the murders were committed by a deranged serial killer who had travelled from town to town. This theory was based on the idea that the killer had a pattern of murdering entire families using the same method, a brutal attack with an axe. However, no other similar murders were reported in the area, and the lack of any consistent clues made it difficult to connect the Villisca murders to any other crimes. The possibility of a serial killer was also complicated by the fact that the killer had not left any tangible evidence behind, making it unlikely that the crime fit the profile of a typical serial murder. As weeks turned into months, the investigation seemed to stall. The townspeople, desperate for answers, turned to their own theories and speculations. Some claimed that the killer had been someone the family knew intimately, perhaps even a friend or relative who had been driven to violence for reasons that were impossible to understand. Others believed that the motive behind the murders was not personal at all, but rather a random act of violence, a senseless act that had no explanation. Despite numerous attempts to crack the case, the investigation failed to produce any meaningful leads. The police were stymied, and the media quickly lost interest, turning their focus to other stories. As the years passed, the case went cold. No arrests were made, and no further evidence was uncovered. The brutal murders of the Moore family became little more than a distant memory, a chilling story that faded into the annals of unsolved crimes. However, the case did not fade from the minds of the people who lived in Villisca. For the residents of the town, the murders were never truly forgotten. The house where the killings took place became a place of legend, and the unsolved nature of the crime only deepened the mystery. As time passed, the investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders became more than just a criminal case. It became a part of the town's folklore, and the unanswered questions surrounding the murders would haunt Villisca for years to come. Though the investigation may have ended without a resolution, the lingering question remained: who was the killer, and why did they commit such an unimaginable act of violence? The mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders would continue to haunt the town and the families of those who perished that night, long after the investigation had ended. As time passed, and the investigation continued to turn up no conclusive leads, a sense of frustration and fear settled over the small town of Villisca. The killer remained at large, and with each passing day, more and more theories emerged about who might have been responsible for the horrific murders. Various suspects were brought in for questioning, but the lack of hard evidence made it impossible to definitively point to any one person. One of the most notable figures to come under suspicion was Reverend George Kelly, the travelling preacher who had been in town at the time of the murders. Kelly's behaviour was erratic, and some in the community found him to be an odd and unsettling figure. He had been seen in Villisca around the time of the murders, and he was known to have a somewhat disturbing history. His eccentricities, combined with his mental instability, made him an easy target for suspicion. Kelly was questioned by the authorities multiple times, and his behaviour during these interviews only heightened the suspicion surrounding him. Some investigators believed that his inability to provide a clear alibi, coupled with his strange demeanour, made him a plausible suspect. However, despite his odd behaviour and the fact that he was in the area on the night of the murders, there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. After several months of intense scrutiny, Kelly was eventually cleared of any involvement, but the suspicion surrounding him would linger in the minds of some. Another theory that emerged focused on the possibility of an intruder from outside Villisca. Given the brutal nature of the murders and the lack of any apparent motive, some speculated that the killer could have been a transient or someone who had come into town with the sole purpose of committing the crime. But despite an exhaustive search for any signs of outsiders in the area, no solid evidence was ever uncovered to support this theory. The lack of forced entry into the home further complicated this theory, as it suggested that the killer may have been someone familiar with the family and the house. As the investigation stretched on, the authorities turned their attention to other possible suspects within the town. However, with each new theory and lead, they were met with dead ends. The lack of a clear motive, the absence of physical evidence, and the eerie calmness of the crime scene made the Villisca Axe Murders one of the most perplexing cases in the history of American crime. No matter how many suspects were brought in, no one could provide the answers the town so desperately needed. The case also began to attract the attention of outsiders, private detectives, amateur sleuths, and curious citizens, all of whom tried to piece together the mystery of the Villisca murders. Some of these outsiders suggested that the killer might have been a local figure, someone who had been hiding in plain sight. Others believed that the crime was the work of a serial killer, and that the Villisca murders were just one in a string of similar killings. However, the lack of any concrete evidence linking the Villisca case to any other unsolved murders made it impossible to draw such connections. With no new leads or breakthroughs, the case eventually grew cold. The town of Villisca, once filled with questions and fear, began to move on. The investigation stagnated, and the media, which had once been obsessed with the case, lost interest. For the families of the victims and the residents of the town, the murders became a distant, painful memory. The killer remained free, and the questions surrounding the murders were left unanswered. However, the story of the Villisca Axe Murders did not end there. Over the years, the house where the murders took place would become a focal point for curiosity and speculation. Tourists, ghost hunters, and true crime enthusiasts would continue to visit the house, drawn by the mystery of the crime and the eerie presence that seemed to linger within its walls. The haunting presence of the murders, combined with the unsolved nature of the case, turned the house into a symbol of fear and fascination. Though the investigation had stalled, the murder of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls was far from forgotten. The unanswered questions and the eerie atmosphere that still surrounded the house made it an enduring mystery, and the case of the Villisca Axe Murders would continue to haunt the people of Villisca and anyone who encountered the chilling tale. As the years passed and the investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders remained unsolved, the story of the crime began to take on an eerie, almost mythic quality. While the townspeople had hoped for justice and closure, the brutal nature of the murders and the lack of answers left an unsettling void that could not be easily filled. Over time, the house where the murders had occurred became more than just a crime scene. It became a place of legend. The more the story of the murders was told, the more it became intertwined with supernatural theories and ghostly speculation. The first reports of strange occurrences in and around the Moore home began to surface shortly after the murders. Visitors to the house, whether out of curiosity or a desire to pay respects to the victims, began to experience unsettling events. Whispers of mysterious sounds, ghostly apparitions, and an overall sense of unease began to spread through the community. People who ventured into the house at night claimed to hear unexplained noises, creaking floorboards, the sound of footsteps, and even faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Some people reported feeling a sudden drop in temperature, a chilling sensation that would wash over them as they moved through the rooms. These strange phenomena quickly became the subject of local gossip, and soon the house was being labelled as haunted. For many, the idea of the house being haunted by the spirits of the murdered Moore family made a kind of dark sense. The victims had been slaughtered so brutally and without warning in what seemed to be a senseless and vengeful act. The idea that their spirits might be trapped in the house, unable to find peace, fit neatly with the growing narrative of a cursed home. The murders had left such an indelible mark on the town of Villisca that it seemed only natural for the trauma of the killings to manifest in supernatural ways. In the years following the murders, there were several accounts from people who claimed to have seen the ghostly figures of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls wandering through the house. Some witnesses described seeing shadowy figures standing in the windows, their faces obscured, while others reported feeling as though they were being watched by unseen eyes. These reports, though unconfirmed and anecdotal, only added to the mystery of the house and reinforced the belief that the spirits of the murdered family had not moved on. There were also reports of visitors experiencing physical sensations while inside the house. Some claimed to feel a cold hand brush against their skin, while others described the sensation of being touched by an invisible force. These experiences, combined with the chilling atmosphere of the house, led some to believe that the Moore family spirits were actively trying to communicate with the living. It wasn't long before the house at 508 East Secondson became a destination for paranormal investigators and ghost hunters, all eager to explore the reported hauntings and uncover the truth behind the strange occurrences. One of the most famous paranormal investigations occurred in the 1990s, when a team of ghost hunters visited the house and documented what they believed to be unexplained phenomena. During their investigation, they reported capturing strange sounds on their equipment, including what sounded like voices and footsteps. Some members of the team even claimed to have felt a presence in the house, as though someone or something was standing close behind them. These findings, although never definitively proven, added another layer to the story of the Villisca Axe Murders. The house, it seemed, had become a magnet for the supernatural, drawing in those who believed that the violent deaths of the Moore family had left behind more than just memories. As the years went by, the house became a popular site for ghost tours and paranormal investigations. Visitors from across the country travelled to Villisca to experience the eerie atmosphere for themselves and to see the place where such a horrific crime had taken place. The town of Villisca, once quiet and untouched by the horrors of the outside world, was now known for its association with the Villisca Axe Murders and the supposed hauntings that followed. For some, the mystery of the murders and the supernatural elements that surrounded the house became more intriguing than the unresolved crime itself. The idea that the house was haunted by the restless spirits of the murdered family became deeply ingrained in the town's identity. It wasn't just a tragic event that had taken place. It was a place where the line between life and death seemed to blur. The spirits of the victims, it seemed, were still lingering, trapped in the house where their lives had been so violently taken. Though the investigation into the murders had long since stalled, the supernatural theories gave the case a new life. The story of the Villisca Axe Murders had evolved from a cold, unsolved crime to a chilling tale of ghosts and curses. A story that would continue to haunt Villisca and its residents for generations to come. The house at 508 E 2nd St. remained a focal point of that story, a place where the past and the supernatural merged, and where the eerie silence of the rooms held the secrets of a brutal crime that was never fully explained. As time passed and the investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders reached a dead end, the case became little more than a chilling memory in the town of Villisca. For the families of the victims, the pain of the murders was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The hopes for justice and closure gradually faded as the years went by, and with each passing year, the town moved on. Life in Villisca returned to its quiet rhythm, though the shadow of the unsolved crime still hung over the community. Yet, while the official investigation had come to a halt, the story of the Villisca Axe Murders was far from over. The eerie nature of the crime and the haunting that followed ensured that the case would remain in the public consciousness. The house at 508 E 2nd St., where the murders had occurred, was left abandoned for many years. But as the years wore on, it took on a new kind of notoriety. The mystery of the crime and the rumours of ghosts and supernatural occurrences surrounding the house turned it into a macabre attraction, drawing the curious and the brave from across the country. By the 1990s, the house was purchased and preserved by a group of enthusiasts who sought to turn it into a tourist destination. They recognized the house's potential to become a site of fascination, both for those interested in true crime and for those curious about the paranormal. Visitors could tour the home, walk through the rooms where the gruesome murders had taken place, and learn about the infamous crime. The house had become a monument to the mystery and the unsolved crime, and though it was no longer a place of everyday life, it became a place where the echoes of the past seemed to linger. Over the years, the house would host countless paranormal investigations. Groups from all over the world visited, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Many of these investigations seemed to confirm the rumours that the house was haunted. From eerie sounds captured on audio recordings to strange feelings of being watched, those who spent time in the house came away with unsettling stories to tell. Some reported experiencing cold spots and other phenomena that they could not explain. Perhaps most unnerving were the repeated accounts of people feeling as though they were not alone, sensing the presence of something or someone watching them from the shadows. For those who believed in the supernatural, these accounts only served to deepen the mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders. The idea that the spirits of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls were trapped in the house, unable to move on, made sense to many. These restless spirits, according to the theories, were somehow bound to the place of their deaths, unable to find peace after their violent and untimely demise. It wasn't just the physical trauma of the murders that kept them trapped in the house. It was the unresolved nature of the crime itself, the unanswered questions about why they were killed and by whom. The house at 508 E 2nd St. became a symbol of this lingering tension between the living and the dead. It was a place where the past seemed to bleed into the present, and where the line between life and death was anything but clear. The house, with its quiet rooms and unsettling atmosphere, continued to hold the memories of the horrific night that had forever altered the lives of those in Villisca. Despite the passage of time, the case of the Villisca Axe Murders was never truly forgotten. The town itself may have moved on, but for many, the haunting mystery of the murders was an inescapable part of its history. The house remained a place of fascination, both for those who sought to understand the crime and for those who hope to connect with the spirits of the victims. Over the years, books, documentaries, and even movies have explored the case, keeping the story alive for new generations of people who continue to be captivated by the mystery. As the years went on, various theories about the killer continued to be debated. Some suggested that the killer was never caught because he had been a serial killer who moved on to other towns, while others believed that the killer was someone who had been living in Villisca and had escaped undetected. Some even suggested that the murderer had been a family member, someone close to the victims who had somehow gone unrecognized. But no matter how many theories were proposed or how many years passed, the truth of the Villisca Axe murders remained elusive. The house, now a historical site and a place of fascination, stood as a silent witness to the horror that had unfolded within its walls. And though the investigation had long since stalled, the mystery of the murders and the possibility that the spirits of the victims still lingered in the house would continue to captivate the imagination of all who encountered the story. The story of the Villisca Axe murders, then, is not just the story of a brutal crime. It is the story of a place, a family, and a town haunted by its own past. It is a mystery that continues to defy explanation, and one that will likely never be solved. The house at 508 East 2nd St. remains a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk even in the most peaceful of places, and the ghosts of the past that may never fully fade away. Though the investigation into the Villisca Axe murders had gone cold, the story of the crime continued to evolve, particularly as more and more people began visiting the house where the murders occurred. By the late 20th century, the house had taken on a life of its own as a haunted landmark, attracting countless visitors from all over the country. These visitors, many of whom were intrigued by the unsettling nature of the crime and the possibility of encountering something supernatural, reported a variety of strange and eerie experiences while inside the house. The first documented paranormal experiences in the house began to surface shortly after it was made publicly accessible. Visitors who dared to step inside the home often spoke of an overwhelming sense of dread and unease that seemed to settle over them once they crossed the threshold. Several accounts described a cold, oppressive atmosphere that filled the rooms, no matter the season or weather outside. The sensation of cold spots, chilling pockets of air that seemed to appear without explanation, was a recurring theme in these stories. It was as though the temperature in the house dropped in certain places, particularly in the rooms where the murders had taken place. But the coldness wasn't the only strange phenomenon that visitors encountered. Some claimed to have heard unexplained sounds, most notably the sound of footsteps walking through the house, even though no one else was nearby. Others reported hearing faint whispers or murmurs as if someone was speaking just out of earshot. These sounds were never clearly identifiable, but they were consistent enough that they piqued the curiosity of paranormal enthusiasts. The whispers were often described as disembodied voices, and for some, they added a layer of eeriness that made the house feel even more haunted. One of the most unsettling reports came from a group of paranormal investigators who spent the night in the house in the 1990s. During their investigation, the team claimed to have captured strange, unexplainable noises on their audio equipment. Among the noises were distinct voices, and at one point, the investigators believed they had heard a voice calling out the name Josiah. The group was initially skeptical, but upon reviewing the footage and sound recordings, they were shocked by what they had heard. These strange recordings were a key piece of evidence for those who believed the house was truly haunted. offering what appeared to be an auditory connection to the past. Others reported more personal, physical experiences. Some visitors claimed to feel an unseen presence, particularly when standing in certain areas of the house. There were stories of people feeling as though they were being watched or touched by an invisible force. One account described a visitor feeling a hand gently resting on their shoulder as they stood in the room where the Moore children had been murdered. The visitor turned around, expecting to see someone, but found no one there. These sensations were not just fleeting moments of discomfort, but felt tangible, as if something or someone was making its presence known. The rooms where the murders took place seemed to be the focal point of much of the paranormal activity. The upstairs bedrooms, where the children and the Stillinger girls had been sleeping when the axe fell, were particularly notorious for strange occurrences. Visitors often reported a heavy feeling in the air, a sensation of grief and sorrow that seemed to hang in the room. It was as if the emotions of the murdered family members lingered, unwilling to leave the place where their lives were violently taken. These emotional experiences, combined with the chilling atmosphere of the house, made it a particularly unsettling place for anyone with an open mind to the paranormal. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence came from a group that used modern technology to attempt to communicate with spirits. Using tools like spirit boxes and electromagnetic field (EMF) detectors, the group claimed to have made contact with the spirits of the Moore family. The spirit box, which is used to communicate by scanning radio frequencies, reportedly picked up several responses that seemed to correspond to questions the investigators asked. One investigator even claimed to have asked, "Who killed you?" and received a voice in response, though the answer was unclear. The responses were brief but unnerving, and for many, they added a layer of authenticity to the belief that the house was haunted. Despite the numerous paranormal investigations, there remained a sense of skepticism surrounding the experiences reported in the house. Critics of the paranormal theories pointed out that many of the incidents could be attributed to natural phenomena, such as drafty old houses causing cold spots, or the creaks and groans of the structure settling. Others argued that the psychological effect of knowing the tragic history of the house could cause people to experience what they believed to be paranormal phenomena. The power of suggestion, they said, could explain many of the odd sensations people felt while inside the house. However, for those who visited the house with an open mind or a belief in the supernatural, the evidence of the house being haunted was undeniable. They argued that the sheer consistency of the reports, cold spots, disembodied voices, unexplained footsteps, could not all be written off as coincidence. The idea that the spirits of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls were still trapped within the house seemed to resonate deeply with those who believed in the possibility of life after death. For them, the haunting wasn't just a series of strange events. It was a manifestation of the unresolved tragedy that had occurred there, a lingering presence that could not be ignored. The house, with its dark history and its eerie atmosphere, had become more than just a place of interest for true crime enthusiasts. It had become a site of pilgrimage for those seeking to connect with the supernatural. As the years passed, the stories of paranormal encounters continued to spread, and the house at 508 E 2nd St. remained one of the most famous haunted locations in the United States. The Villisca Axe Murders, though unsolved and cold, continued to captivate the imagination of those who were drawn to the chilling combination of crime and the supernatural. The enduring mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders became more than just a tragic tale of violence. It evolved into a focal point where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural seemed to blur. The unsolved nature of the crime, combined with the eerie atmosphere that surrounded the house, fueled the belief that the spirits of the victims might still be lingering within its walls. Was it possible that the violent deaths of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls had left behind more than just physical traces? Could the unresolved crime, with all its brutality and tragedy, have created a haunting that spanned the years, trapping the spirits of the victims in the house? For many, the lingering presence of the Moore family and their young guests became central to the ghost stories that swirled around the house. The house had become a place where death and the afterlife seemed to coexist, with each room holding the echoes of the past. The supernatural theories surrounding the case were fueled by the brutal and senseless nature of the murders. Such unprovoked violence seemed to demand an explanation that extended beyond the mundane. It was as if the spirits of the victims, having met such an untimely and violent end, were trapped, unable to move on. The idea that the house itself had become a vessel for the spirits of those who perished there grew stronger as more people visited the property and reported unusual occurrences. Many of these visitors came to the house seeking answers, hoping that the lingering presence of the spirits could offer some insight into the crime that had occurred. Some believed that the spirits were trapped in a kind of purgatory, unable to find peace because the truth of their deaths had never been revealed. These visitors didn't just see the house as a site of historical interest. They saw it as a place where the unresolved emotions of the murdered family might be felt. For them, the house wasn't just haunted. It was a manifestation of their desire for justice, a reminder of the souls that had been left behind without closure. The possibility that the supernatural activity in the house was linked to the unresolved nature of the crime resonated with many who came to visit. The idea that the killer might still be walking free and that the spirits of the victims were somehow aware of this became an integral part of the haunting narrative. The stories of people experiencing ghostly encounters, feeling cold spots, hearing disembodied voices, and witnessing strange figures became more than just anecdotal. They were interpreted as signs of the spirit's unrest, a cry for the truth to be revealed. This connection between the unresolved crime and the supernatural elements of the case added a layer of depth to the ongoing fascination with the Villisca Axe Murders. The idea that the victims' spirits had been left behind, bound to the house because justice had never been served, made the story of the Villisca Axe Murders even more tragic. It wasn't just the physical deaths of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls that lingered. It was the emotional and spiritual toll of a crime that had never been fully explained. As more paranormal investigations were conducted, the link between the unresolved crime and the eerie phenomena grew more compelling. Investigators who used their equipment to search for paranormal activity were often struck by the sense of emotional weight in the house. The house seemed to carry the grief of the murdered family, and that grief manifested in the strange events that occurred within its walls. Visitors spoke of feeling overwhelmed with sorrow, as though they could sense the immense pain the family had suffered in their final moments. For those who believed in the paranormal, the idea that the spirits of the Moore family were somehow reaching out, unable to move on until their killer was found, made sense. In this interpretation, the house wasn't just haunted by the past, it was haunted by the promise of something left unfinished. The unresolved crime, the unanswered questions about the killer's identity, became a central part of the supernatural story that enveloped the house. On the other hand, skeptics continued to dismiss the paranormal activity as nothing more than the result of suggestion and the psychological impact of knowing the gruesome history of the house. They argued that the eerie feelings, the cold spots, and the strange noises were all products of a mind primed by the knowledge of the murders. But for those who had experienced the phenomena firsthand, the connection between the unresolved crime and the supernatural was undeniable. They saw the house as a place where the spirit world had been made manifest, a space where the trauma of the past had not been allowed to rest. Regardless of whether one believed in the supernatural or not, the case of the Villisca Axe Murders had become something more than just an unsolved crime. It had evolved into a story of spirits, unresolved emotions, and a dark history that had seeped into the fabric of the house itself. The spirits of the victims, it seemed, were not merely lingering in the afterlife. They were part of the ongoing mystery, a reminder that the truth had never been revealed. For those who visited the house in search of answers, the connection between the crime and the haunting was a constant presence, a shadow that lingered over their experience. The unresolved nature of the crime ensured that the spirits of the Moore family and their guests would never be at peace. And so, the Villisca Axe Murders remained not just a story of murder, but a story of spirits trapped in a house where the truth had yet to be uncovered. As the decades passed, and the stories of hauntings at the Villisca Axe Murder House continued to captivate the public imagination, the house evolved from a crime scene to a destination of fascination. What was once an abandoned and eerie relic of a horrific crime was slowly transformed into a tourist attraction, a place for those interested in both true crime and the supernatural to explore. The house became a monument not only to the brutal murders that took place there, but also to the enduring mystery and fear that had surrounded the location for so long. In the 1990s, a group of investors purchased the property with the intention of preserving it and turning it into a historical site. They saw an opportunity to capitalize on the intrigue surrounding the case, combining the allure of true crime with the mystery of the alleged hauntings. The house was carefully restored, preserving as much of its original structure as possible, so that visitors could experience the space in the same way the Moore family and the Stillinger girls might have known it. The property, still bearing the scars of its tragic past, began to attract more and more attention as word spread about its paranormal reputation. In the years that followed, the Villisca Axe Murder House became a popular stop for ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, and those with a fascination for macabre history. Tours were offered, allowing people to walk through the house and examine the rooms where the murders took place. Some visitors came simply to explore the site where one of the most infamous crimes in American history had occurred, while others were hoping to witness something supernatural firsthand. The house was often featured in documentaries, TV specials, and even podcasts, further cementing its place in the public consciousness. It became a must-visit destination for fans of true crime and ghost stories alike. For those drawn to the darker side of history, it was a place where the past seemed to bleed into the present, a place where the living and the dead coexisted in uneasy proximity. The house, once a private home, had become a symbol of fear and intrigue, an unsettling reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. For many visitors, the experience of stepping inside the house was a deeply emotional one. Standing in the rooms where the murders took place, it was impossible not to feel the weight of the history that lingered in the air. The very atmosphere of the house seemed to carry with it the sadness, grief, and trauma that had been left behind by the violent deaths of the Moore family and their guests. Some people reported feeling overwhelmed by a sense of sorrow, while others spoke of a strange feeling of being watched, as though the spirits of the deceased were still present, keeping a silent vigil over the house. As the house gained in popularity, it became a place where people came to confront their own fears and explore the unknown. Paranormal. Investigators from all over the world continue to visit, using their equipment to search for evidence of ghostly activity. Some of these investigations were documented, and the results often seem to confirm the eerie reputation of the house. Audio recordings, photos, and video footage captured strange sounds, shadowy figures, and unexplained flashes of light. Some claim to have experienced physical sensations, such as being touched or pushed, while others reported hearing disembodied voices or footsteps in the dark. The most frequently cited paranormal activity occurred in the upstairs bedrooms, where the Moore children and the Stillinger girls had been murdered. Visitors often described feeling a deep sense of unease when entering these rooms. Cold spots were common, and many people felt as though they were being watched. The eerie silence of the rooms, combined with the haunting memories of the murders, seemed to amplify the feelings of discomfort that many visitors experienced. Some even claimed to have seen ghostly figures standing in the windows or moving silently through the rooms. While the paranormal evidence gathered at the house was far from definitive, the consistency of the experiences and the number of people who reported similar encounters lent credibility to the idea that something unusual was happening within the house. Whether these experiences were the result of lingering spirits or simply the result of the psychological impact of the house's dark history remained open to interpretation. For many, however, the ghostly reports seemed to provide a fitting continuation of the story, an ongoing chapter in the tale of the Villisca Axe Murders, a story that had never truly ended. The house itself had become a symbol of both the brutal crime and the supernatural mystery that surrounded it. It was a place where the past could never be fully separated from the present, and where the boundaries between life and death seemed blurred. The Villisca Axe Murder House was no longer just a crime scene. It had become an integral part of the town's identity and a focal point for both the history of the murders and the eerie tales of hauntings that had followed. Though the murders had been committed over a century ago, the house continued to live on in the collective imagination of those who visited, investigated, and speculated. The story of the Villisca Axe Murders, both the true crime and the supernatural elements, had been woven into the fabric of the town of Villisca, and the house would forever remain a reminder of the chilling events that had unfolded within its walls. Despite the passage of over a century, the Villisca Axe Murders continue to haunt both the town of Villisca and the broader public consciousness. What began as a gruesome crime has morphed into an enduring symbol of both historical tragedy and supernatural intrigue. The house at 508 East 2nd Street stands as a constant reminder of the horrors that occurred within its walls, as well as the unanswered questions that have continued to swirl around the case. For the residents of Villisca, the legacy of the Axe Murders is still a part of the town's identity. Though the town has moved on from the days when the murder investigation was at the forefront of local life, the story of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls continues to echo through the town's history. The house, now a tourist attraction, serves as both a historical monument to the past and a site of lingering mystery. Tourists, true crime aficionados, and paranormal enthusiasts continue to visit the house in droves, fascinated not only by the unsolved crime, but also by the eerie reports of ghostly encounters. For many, the case is a dark riddle that refuses to be solved, a tragic event that remains unresolved in a way that resonates far beyond the limits of the small Iowa town. Over the years, the Villisca Axe Murders have been explored in books, documentaries, and films, contributing to the case's growing mythos. These retellings, often blending fact with speculation, have kept the story alive for new generations of people, ensuring that the mystery surrounding the murders will never be forgotten. The house itself has become an iconic location where the past and present seem to intertwine. For those who visit, the question of whether the house is truly haunted has become almost secondary to the experience of standing in the very place where such unimaginable violence occurred. The atmosphere in the house, for many, is palpable, a sense of sadness and sorrow that hangs in the air, mixing with the sense that something is not quite right. Whether these sensations are the product of suggestion or the result of lingering spirits remains up for debate, but for many, the connection between the haunting and the crime is undeniable. For the families of the victims, the legacy of the murders is more complicated. Though time has helped to ease some of the immediate grief, the case's unsolved nature has left a permanent scar on their lives. The loss of Josiah, Sarah, their children, and the Stillinger girls is a tragedy that can never be fully reconciled, especially since the identity of the killer was never discovered. The Moore family's descendants, as well as the families of the Stillinger girls, have lived with the weight of the mystery for generations. The unanswered questions have prevented them from finding closure, keeping the memory of the murders alive in a way that has, at times, been painful. The enduring nature of the mystery has also made the case a focal point for discussions about crime, justice, and the supernatural. Some argue that the very nature of the Villisca Axe Murders, being both a true crime and a story involving the supernatural, has given it a unique place in American history. It is a case that refuses to fit neatly into either category, one that challenges the boundaries between fact and fiction. As the house continues to draw interest, it remains a place where visitors can confront their fears, not just of the unknown, but of the very real violence that occurred there so many years ago. In the realm of criminal justice, the Villisca Axe Murders are a reminder of the limits of investigation and the possibility that some cases may never be solved. Despite numerous theories, suspects, and investigations over the years, the killer's identity remains unknown. This open-ended aspect of the case adds to its mystique and has contributed to its place in true crime lore. In a sense, the fact that the case is unsolved is part of what keeps it alive. Its very uncertainty draws people in and invites speculation, discussion, and even the belief that the answers may one day be uncovered. At the same time, the story of the Villisca Axe Murders speaks to the resilience of the town of Villisca. While the crime may have shattered the town's sense of peace in 1912, the community endured. Over the years, the town has continued to grow, attracting visitors for reasons other than the infamous murders. The presence of the house and the enduring mystery, however, has made Villisca a place of both sorrow and fascination, where the past is never truly gone, but rather woven into the fabric of the town's identity. The haunting of the Villisca Axe Murder House, whether real or imagined, adds an additional layer to the tragedy. The idea that the spirits of the victims remain trapped in the place where they were murdered serves as a powerful symbol of the unresolved pain that still lingers in the town and in the hearts of the families affected by the crime. The lingering questions about the killer's identity, the motive behind the murders, and whether justice will ever be served, have left a mark on the collective memory of the town, making the story of the Villisca Axe Murders one that will never fade from history. Ultimately, the legacy of the Villisca Axe Murders is a complex and multifaceted one. blending elements of true crime, mystery, and the supernatural into a narrative that continues to capture the imagination of those who encounter it. It is a story that speaks to the enduring power of unresolved mysteries and to the way in which the past, no matter how dark, continues to shape the present. The house at 508 East 2nd Street stands as a testament to this, a place where the echoes of tragedy, the search for answers, and the whisper of ghosts remain intertwined, forever a part of Villisca's haunting history.